My child, stop scrolling for just a moment, because what found its way to you now was not meant to disappear beneath another video, another thought, another distraction. There is something unfolding quietly behind the scenes of your connection, and although your eyes have not witnessed it, the emotional weight of it has already reached a place you cannot see. Today, someone spoke about you in the presence of the person whose heart has been tied to yours in ways even they have struggled to understand. It was not a casual conversation. It was not an ordinary mention of your name. Something was said that touched the exact place inside them they had been protecting for far too long, and when those words finally reached them, the strength they had been pretending to carry began to fall apart. They tried to remain composed. They tried to act as though the conversation had changed nothing. But heaven saw the moment their eyes changed. Heaven saw the silence that followed. Heaven saw what happened when they were finally alone. You have wondered why certain connections remain alive even when there is silence between two people. You have wondered why a person can step away physically and yet remain present emotionally, why memories return without warning, why there are moments when the heart seems to remember what the mind has been trying to release. There are stories human beings tell themselves so they can continue moving forward. Your soulmate has been telling themselves one of those stories. They have been saying they are fine. They have been saying enough time has passed. They have been saying that whatever happened between you belongs to another chapter. Yet today, another person unknowingly placed a mirror in front of them, and for the first time in longer than they would admit, they could not look away from what that mirror revealed. Do not misunderstand what I am telling you. What they heard was not some cruel rumor designed to frighten you. This is not a message of fear. What shook them was something far more powerful: perspective. They heard something about the person you have become while they were still holding on to an old image of you. They discovered that life had been moving inside you even when they could not see it. They were reminded that the version of you they once knew was not standing still waiting for their understanding. And suddenly, the possibility entered their mind that they may have misunderstood your silence, your distance, your restraint, and even the choices you made when they expected you to chase after answers. The first thing they did was deny the feeling. Their face remained still, but their thoughts accelerated. They asked a small question as though it meant nothing. They wanted one more detail. Then another. Their voice tried to sound casual while their heart became louder with every sentence. The person speaking did not realize what was happening inside them. They did not know that one sentence had already opened a door your soulmate had spent months trying to keep closed. They did not know that your name still had the power to change the atmosphere around them. They simply continued talking, and with each new detail, your soulmate felt an uncomfortable truth beginning to rise. You were never as indifferent as they once convinced themselves you were. That realization struck them harder than anything else. There was a time when they looked at your quietness and assumed you had stopped caring. There was a time when your refusal to force a conversation made them believe you had already moved on emotionally. They interpreted your self-control as coldness because they did not understand what it had cost you to remain composed. They did not see the nights when you questioned yourself. They did not see the private battles where you chose dignity over desperation. They did not see how many times your heart wanted to reach outward while another part of you knew that love should not require you to abandon yourself just to keep someone from walking away. And today, they heard something that challenged the entire story they had created. The person speaking mentioned how deeply you had been affected by certain things without ever making a spectacle of your pain. They described a side of you your soulmate had either forgotten or never fully recognized. They spoke about your loyalty. They spoke about the way you carried disappointment without using it as a weapon. They spoke about how you had changed after everything, not by becoming bitter, but by becoming quieter, stronger, more selective with your energy. Your soulmate listened, and somewhere beneath every defense, one terrible question appeared. What if I was wrong about them? That question would not leave. They changed the subject almost immediately. But the heart does not change the subject so easily. For the rest of the conversation, part of them remained stuck on your name. They smiled at the wrong moments. They answered questions without fully hearing them. They looked down at their phone, not because there was something important on the screen, but because looking at another person's face might have revealed too much. They suddenly became aware of everything they had not said to you. Every unfinished conversation began returning in fragments. Every moment when pride spoke louder than love became sharper. Every time they assumed there would always be another chance began to feel less certain. My child, there are realizations that arrive slowly, like sunrise. And then there are realizations that enter the heart like a door being opened all at once. Today was the second kind. They left that conversation carrying more than anyone around them could see. On the outside, nothing dramatic happened. They walked away. They continued with their day. They may have answered messages. They may have performed ordinary responsibilities. They may even have laughed at something. But underneath those ordinary movements, their emotional world had changed direction. The words they heard about you repeated themselves again and again. One particular detail followed them everywhere. It had to do with the fact that you never tried to destroy their image after they hurt you. That detail became almost unbearable. You could have spoken differently. You could have revealed every flaw. You could have made them the villain in every room you entered. You could have turned your disappointment into a public performance. Yet somewhere along the way, despite your own confusion and pain, you chose not to become cruel. Even when you were misunderstood, you protected things that no longer benefited you. Even when people asked questions, there were truths you kept private because your heart did not want revenge. And when your soulmate heard that today, something inside them cracked. Because they remembered the story they told about you. They remembered the assumptions. They remembered moments when they questioned your motives. They remembered how easy it had been to interpret your silence in whatever way protected them from examining their own behavior. And now they were forced to face the possibility that the person they thought had stopped caring may actually have cared enough not to retaliate. That was when the emotion became too strong to ignore. They found a place where no one was watching. Maybe it was inside a room with the door closed. Maybe it was inside a car where the world outside seemed strangely distant. Maybe they stood near a window, pretending to look at something beyond the glass while their breathing changed. The location does not matter as much as what happened within them. For a few moments, everything they had been holding back came rushing forward at once. Their eyes filled before they were ready. They blinked rapidly as though they could stop it. They pressed their lips together and tried to regain control. But this was not only sadness. That is why the emotion surprised them. It was regret mixed with tenderness. It was relief mixed with longing. It was the painful recognition that something precious may have been present all along while fear, timing, misunderstanding, and pride prevented them from receiving it clearly. They were not only crying over what happened. They were crying over what they suddenly understood. There is a difference. And heaven wants you to understand that difference before the next revelation arrives. For a long time, your soulmate has remembered the ending more vividly than the beginning. They remembered tension. They remembered distance. They remembered the moment conversations became harder. They remembered what was missing. But today, something someone said forced them to travel backward emotionally, beyond the difficult chapter, back toward the moments they had buried under disappointment. They remembered how safe your presence once felt. They remembered a look you gave them when they were pretending to be stronger than they felt. They remembered the way you listened when they were speaking about something nobody else seemed to take seriously. They remembered a moment when you made them laugh at a time they had been carrying more pressure than you knew. And suddenly, their mind began gathering evidence their pride had spent so long ignoring. It was as though every memory had changed meaning. What once seemed ordinary now looked precious. What once seemed small now looked rare. What once seemed replaceable suddenly did not feel replaceable at all. And that is when another question entered them. What if the connection was real, and I was too afraid to trust it? My beloved child, stay with this message, because what happened after that question is where the story begins to move in a direction even they did not expect. They reached for their phone. Not immediately. First, they resisted. They walked away from it. Then came back. They opened something and closed it again. They may have searched your name. They may have looked at an old message. They may have stared at a photograph they had convinced themselves no longer affected them. They may simply have sat there with the phone in their hand, imagining what they would say if they had the courage to contact you without knowing how you would respond. And for the first time, the fear was not merely that you might reject them. The deeper fear was that you might have learned how to live beautifully without them. That thought shook them. Because there was once a time when they assumed your connection would remain available in some invisible way. Even if you stopped speaking, even if time passed, they believed they could return emotionally whenever they were ready. They never said this aloud, perhaps they did not even consciously realize it, but somewhere inside them was the assumption that the door between you would never completely close. Today, they were confronted with a possibility they had avoided. You may no longer be standing where they left you. You have grown. You have seen things differently. You have developed boundaries. You have begun understanding that love is not proven by how much uncertainty you can survive. And though your heart may still carry tenderness, tenderness is not the same as waiting forever. When they heard how much you had changed, this became real to them. Their tears deepened, not because they wanted ownership over you, but because they finally understood that time is not neutral. Time changes people. Silence changes people. Healing changes people. And the person they remember may still exist within you, but that person now stands beside wisdom you did not have before. This is why their emotions became difficult to control. They realized that if they ever approached you again, they could not return with the same confusion. They could not return simply because they missed you. They could not expect you to accept half answers, uncertain intentions, or affection that disappears whenever fear returns. Something inside them knew that if they came toward you now, they would have to come differently. That realization frightened them. But it also awakened something. Because beneath the fear, they felt a strange sense of clarity. For months, perhaps longer, they had been asking themselves what they wanted without ever reaching a true answer. They moved around the question. They distracted themselves. They blamed circumstances. They told themselves it was complicated. Yet the moment they imagined someone else discovering the value in you that they had failed to honor, the confusion became much smaller. They knew. And that knowledge came with consequences. Suddenly they could imagine you laughing with someone who did not make you question your worth. They imagined someone listening to you without defensiveness. They imagined someone noticing the parts of your heart they had once overlooked. They imagined someone receiving the love you had once tried to offer them. And something within them whispered, "I may have taught them how to live without me." That thought became unbearable. But heaven did not allow that moment to become punishment. Understand this clearly. The purpose of this revelation was not to crush them with guilt. It was to wake them from emotional avoidance. There is a difference between guilt that destroys and awareness that transforms. What happened today carried the second kind of energy. Their heart was being shown something they could no longer ignore, so they could decide what kind of person they wanted to become from this point forward. You see, my child, sometimes a person does not understand what they feel while everything remains available. They understand when distance gives them perspective. They understand when another voice describes what they were too close to see. They understand when the possibility of losing something forever forces them to examine what they once treated as temporary. And today, someone unknowingly gave your soulmate that perspective. But there is more. Because the person who spoke about you did not stop with your past. They said something about your present. Something your soulmate was not prepared to hear. Their expression changed instantly. The room seemed quieter. They asked the person to repeat it. Not because they had not heard. Because they hoped they had misunderstood. And this, my beloved child, is the part heaven wants you to hear carefully. They were told that you had recently spoken in a way that suggested you were no longer carrying anger toward them. Your soulmate had expected many things. Anger would have been easier. Resentment would have been easier. Even indifference might have been easier. But knowing that you had reached a place where you could think of them without needing revenge or bitterness did something unexpected to their heart. Because forgiveness made them see your pain more clearly. If you were still furious, they could have argued with you inside their imagination. They could have defended themselves against a version of you that was still fighting. But your peace left them with nothing to fight against. Only themselves. They remembered the moments they might have apologized more sincerely. They remembered conversations where they were more interested in being understood than understanding you. They remembered how often both of you were protecting yourselves instead of protecting the connection. Then they covered their face with their hands and cried in a way they had not expected. Quietly at first. Then with the kind of emotion that comes when the body can no longer carry what the heart has postponed. And somewhere between one breath and the next, they said your name. Not loudly. Not for anyone to hear. Just enough for the silence to hear it. They said your name as though speaking it brought both comfort and pain. And then came the words heaven had been waiting for them to admit. I still care. That sentence changed something. Until that moment, they had allowed themselves to miss memories without admitting they missed you. They had allowed themselves to feel nostalgia without naming love. They had allowed themselves to wonder about you without admitting they were still emotionally connected. But once those words left their mouth, the defenses weakened. I still care. They said it again internally. And then something deeper surfaced. I never stopped. This was the truth beneath everything. Not that every day had been filled with longing. Human hearts are more complicated than that. They lived. They distracted themselves. They had moments where they believed they were moving beyond the connection. But the core feeling never completely disappeared. It became quieter. It hid beneath routine. It learned how to exist without being acknowledged. Today, it returned to the surface. And once it did, another realization followed. They were not only grieving you. They were grieving who they had been when they had you. There had been a softer version of themselves around you. A more hopeful version. A version that believed deeply in possibility, even when fear complicated everything. When the connection became difficult, they thought distance would make everything simpler. Instead, distance made them harder. More guarded. More skeptical. More careful with emotion. Now, hearing about you again reminded them of the person they had been before their defenses became so strong. That is why their breakdown carried something unexpected, longing for themselves. You represented a chapter when their heart was still trying to believe. And now heaven was showing them that the story did not have to remain frozen where it broke. But neither could it simply return to what it was. If anything was ever to be restored, it would require truth. Not fantasy. Not chasing. Not pressure. Truth. And my beloved child, this is where your own journey becomes important. You are not being asked to run toward anyone. You are not being asked to abandon your boundaries because someone somewhere is emotional. You are not being told that their realization automatically earns access to your heart again. Your growth matters too. Your peace matters too. Your discernment matters. This message is not about making you wait for someone. It is about helping you understand why the energy surrounding this connection may suddenly feel different. A truth has been acknowledged where denial once lived. And when truth enters a space, choices begin to change. The first choice your soulmate made after their tears stopped was small. But it mattered. They opened the conversation they had avoided. Not with you. Not yet. With themselves. They stopped asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and started asking, "What did I contribute to what happened between us?" That question is the beginning of maturity. They thought about the times they withdrew instead of communicating. They thought about moments where fear made decisions on their behalf. They thought about the expectations they placed on you without explaining what they needed. They remembered how you sometimes reached toward them and how they questioned your sincerity because old wounds had taught them not to trust anything good for too long. Then another memory returned. A moment you may not even realize they still remember. You once said something simple to them. Perhaps it was during a conversation that seemed ordinary at the time. Perhaps you told them you only wanted honesty. Perhaps you said you would rather hear a painful truth than live inside uncertainty. Perhaps you asked them not to shut you out when things became difficult. They remember. And today those words returned with a different meaning. Because they finally understood that what you were asking for was not perfection. You were asking for presence. And they were not always able to give it. Their heart broke again. Not because they believed everything was their fault. It was not. Two souls can misunderstand one another without either person being entirely wrong. But for the first time, they were willing to look at their side without immediately defending it. That willingness changed the atmosphere around them. Heaven noticed. And then came the moment that has not yet reached you. The moment that makes this message urgent. They began writing something. At first, it was only one sentence. They erased it. Then they wrote another. Deleted that too. Their hands hesitated because there are words that become terrifying when they are finally sincere. They were not trying to impress you. They were not creating a perfect speech. They were trying to say something they should have said long ago. The message began again. This time, they did not erase the first line. They continued. A few words became several sentences. Several sentences became something much deeper. They admitted a fear. They admitted a regret. They acknowledged something you had done for them that they had never properly thanked you for. Then they wrote the sentence that made them stop and stare at the screen. Because once they wrote it, there was no pretending they did not feel it. They wrote that losing the connection had taught them what the connection actually meant. They sat there staring at those words. Their thumb hovered over the screen. Their breathing changed again. And that is when something happened that even they did not expect. Another notification appeared. A message from the same person who had spoken about you earlier. Your soulmate opened it. There was one more detail. One thing that had not been mentioned during the earlier conversation. And when they read it, the unfinished message to you suddenly felt more urgent. Because what they learned made them realize they may not have as much emotional time as they assumed. Not because something terrible is coming. But because your life is moving. A door is beginning to open around you. A change is approaching your world. Someone around you has noticed it. And the person who told your soulmate what they heard today knows more about this change than your soulmate realized. They stared at the new message, reading the final sentence again and again. Then they looked back at the words they had written to you. For several seconds, they did nothing. One decision stood between silence and truth. One movement of the hand. One message that could reopen everything. And just as they finally decided what they were going to do, they discovered one final piece of information about you that changed the meaning of the entire day.